This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then Notes on Resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. Hello, and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky. Today, I had an opportunity to talk with Sarah Marikos, the Executive Director of the ACE Resource Network. We had an amazing conversation that I just want to keep talking to her for hours upon hours. We talked about ACEs and PACEs. We talked about how our systems and our communities can best serve people, whether they've experienced trauma or not, and why we need more storytellers. I think you're going to love this conversation. Hi, Sarah. I'm so excited to be talking to you today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Before we do the introductions and you tell us who you are and why we're talking today, I wanted to ask you a question. If you could have any superpower, what would that be?
I only get to pick one. I want them all.
Yes.
Perhaps I'm in a greedy moment in my life right now. I would love the ability to communicate and connect really effectively and authentically with all types of people.
Mm-hmm.
Something that is important to me and something I'm learning about, and in my personal life and in my professional life, it's something that I'm really seeking. And so,
Are you thinking like even all language barriers would be eliminated?
That would be incredible. Yeah, no, that would be incredible. I think there's so much disconnection and an inability, so many groups of people and individuals to really connect. There's so many barriers I see to that, and see particularly in the last couple of years. And I really believe that our inability to connect over, many shared issues and concerns is one of our biggest challenges.
Yes, I'm in agreement with you on that. And that would be, you're right, that would be an amazing superpower. I'll have you back as a guest, and the next time you can answer your number 2 superpower. So, Sarah, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, who are you and what do you do? And how is it that you are in a place to be thinking about trauma and resiliency?
Yeah, thank you for the question and opportunity. I've sort of had a winding path, but I was really influenced as a young child by my family and my friends, and really observing how in different neighborhoods and different communities that I was a part of, these really stark differences, the neighborhoods looked and felt. My parents they met at a preschool. They worked at a preschool together, and they were educators. And through their work was exposed to just lots of the different communities that they worked in. And as I moved schools and had different experiences, really saw how, again, our neighborhoods and environments influence our opportunities and influence our health. And I continued to see that as I grew up, and we had some major events here in the United States. One that was particularly impactful to me was when I was in college and Hurricane Katrina happened, and we witnessed the devastating impact of Hurricane Katrina and how it affected some communities more than others.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was really experiencing, so this was in the 2000s, a lot of loved ones struggling with opioid addiction as that epidemic grew through the 2000s and obviously through today, and just noticing different opportunities for resources and support and treatment. So I was really interested in why, and felt that there's these injustices and so many of these health-related outcomes, and wanting to understand why and what we could do about it. I was particularly focused on childhood adversity and trauma because, again, of my own personal experiences and experiences around me. So I decided to pursue, I was a pre-med student and really thought that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, but then learned about the field of public health and learned about epidemiology and became very interested in disaster epidemiology and really wanting to understand the root causes of some of these really disparate environments and circumstances. And so I became an epidemiologist and really wanted to study and understand things like, natural disasters and, emergencies and trauma and how that affects people's health and well-being.
Yes.
That's sort of how I got started and have the opportunity to do the work that I do today, which is working to reduce childhood adversity and trauma and supporting people who have experienced that. And I get to do that in a variety of ways through a philanthropically funded initiative called the ACE Resource Network.
Wow. And that's how we met, which is the thinking about trauma and how can we really understand the causes, understand the effects, and then actually do something about it.
Exactly. That last piece being so critical. And so one of the ways at the ACE Resource Network that we are working to support people who've experienced trauma is to advance research and that understanding of how trauma gets under our skin.
Yes.
And what we can do to intervene to support people. So it was wonderful meeting you this fall and getting to have that experience together.
Yes. Thank you. It was a thrill to be part of the project that you and I are part of. And you talked about a couple things I want to unpack a little bit. You talked about ACEs, which are, critically important, and listeners to this podcast will have heard that term before. But can you just talk about what are ACEs and what is the science behind them?
Yeah. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it refers to a study that was done by the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in Kaiser Permanente in the mid-1990s. And what they did is that they asked about 17,000 adults about experiences in childhood. And there were 10 of them. And those 10 experiences were physical, emotional, or sexual abuse before the age of 18, physical or emotional neglect, and then 5 different types of challenges before the age of 18, where a household member had mental illness or problematic substance use, or witnessed intimate partner violence, or your parents or caregivers got divorced or separated, or someone in your household was incarcerated. And so they asked these 17,000 adults, who were sort of middle class, they had health insurance, most were employed, and said, did you experience any of these? And what was discovered through this study is that these adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are incredibly common. 2 out of 3 of the adults in this group experienced at least one.
Wow.
About 1 in 6 experienced 4 or more.
Okay. Wow.
It really was a landmark finding. And, hearing your reaction when I share this with others, it surprises people because I think, there's a lot of reasons why we don't often talk about these things. So the study really illuminated how common they are, and not only how common they are, but that the more ACEs that we experience, the more likely we are to experience very common, costly, and serious health conditions. And so ACEs are associated in a dose-response fashion, meaning the more we experience, there's an increased risk of over 40 health conditions, for example. This includes, things that are really common that include heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, includes depression, anxiety. It includes asthma.
Wow.
And so it was a really big deal to learn that many of our leading causes of death and morbidity in the U.S. are associated with these early life experiences. And so if we're serious about preventing morbidity and mortality related to these conditions, we have to be looking at our early life experiences.
Yes. Wow. So that's a really large study. And given that it was done by I'm thinking that what's happening on the back end is they were connecting people's, I'm sure, anonymized medical records to their responses. Am I sort of getting that correct? So you could say that somebody had a certain number of ACEs and you could see a certain health profile?
Yeah. So the study that was done, this original ACEs study, and I want to emphasize there's been hundreds and thousands of studies done since then to validate many of these findings. And it's been done in a variety of ways, from self-report, health status, to verified medical records that have confirmed that these health outcomes are much more common among people who've experienced more ACEs. Okay. Along with these health outcomes, ACEs are also associated with learning challenges, developmental challenges among children. As adults, the more we experience, the shorter our lifespan, the higher risk for a shorter lifespan, I should say, and can even impact our relationships and our experiences in the workplace. So they affect us in a lot of different ways. And so that's why I'm incredibly passionate about raising awareness, particularly around the science of it, because what we have found is that when people learn about ACEs and they start to understand the science a little bit about how this early exposure to really these sort of stressful, potentially traumatic events can really affect a child's developing brain or body. It can affect their immune system, and it can affect their metabolic system, and what many doctors and scientists call the toxic stress response, so that we can become more sensitized. And this is in part some of the mechanisms that can lead to, these negative outcomes.
Right.
And so through my work and through numberstory.org, we really work to educate people about the science of ACEs, because what I've found is that when people learn about it, it can bring up feelings of grief. It can also help people forgive themselves a little bit. It can help people understand things in a new way. It can really change how we see ourselves in an empowering way, to know that the things that happened to us as kids weren't our fault. And there may be reasons why we're feeling the way that we're feeling now as adults, and that there's things that we can do about them.
Yes. And I imagine, as an individual taking the test, kind of answering these questions, it could be really illuminating for some people who never thought about their childhood or their past in this way. And I imagine for some people it can just be, as you said, there's a grief associated with it. It be very triggering for people as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's why at numberstory.org, our goal is to educate and provide information. And for people who are interested in, looking at that 10-question survey that was originally developed, it's available. And really think it's a tool to better understand one's own history and one's own self. It's certainly not the whole story, right? I think,
right. I mean, so many of these tools, it's just a piece of the story.
Exactly. I love in the title of your podcast about resilience and I certainly have complicated feelings around that word, but right, this tool is helpful, but it doesn't bring in things like your own resilience or your community resilience. So it's a piece of the puzzle that we found can really be life-changing for many people.
I'm so pleased that you actually mentioned the word resilience and your complicated relationship to it. At various points, you may have heard me say that I have a not completely hate relationship with the word resilience. I think it's a word, it's neutral. It means what it means, but how it manifests in our lives. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you think of the word resilience without actually putting thoughts in your head by first telling you what I think of the word resilience beyond what I've shared. So why is it problematic to you?
It's problematic to me because when we think about children and when we think about young people, and when let's think about infants, right? And think about trauma, whether it's happening in their community, in their immediate environment, in their home, in all the different ways. Millions of children in this country experience and are experiencing things like abuse and neglect, and they shouldn't have to. And what we do when those children, those infants get older and perhaps they're having trouble in school or they become young adults, we ask so much of them, we expect so much of them to just be resilient. Mm-hmm. And they shouldn't have to be that resilient. And when we look at neighborhoods and communities that there's been disinvestments for decades, whether due to racism or discrimination, these communities have to be more resilient because of, these structural factors that create these inequities. And we can't keep, how dare we continue to put children in traumatic experiences and ask them at an individual level to be resilient and overcome when we now so well understand the biology of early trauma and how it can affect kids. It can change not just how we feel, but function, right?
Yes. So I don't have a public health education, a formal public health education. So if I did, I think I could have said those exact words. That is what makes the word resilient so complicated to me as well. We all have our own individual level of resilience and we do what we need to do to survive. But I feel like the system, quote unquote, and our institutions and our community have a responsibility to be supportive of individuals who have gone through trauma or to build a system that isn't traumatizing people to start with. Yeah. So, I think you've started to talk a little bit about sort of the role of systems and our institutions in maybe perpetuating trauma. What is the role in helping people overcome and helping people build resilience and, move on from their trauma?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a couple of thoughts. One, I really admire the work that has been done. Yeah, I'm in Northern California and I've lived in California most of my life. And I really admire the work that's been done by the California Surgeon General's office that was led by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who is our senior advisor here at the ACE Resource Network. And what her office did at the time is develop a response to that question about, of these sectors that serve children and families, how can they be trauma-informed and trauma-responsive, right? And also prevent further victimization. And so there's a great guide that I admire that talks about how do we do that. It's called Roadmap to Resilience. And so how does the formal education sector, what can they do in those systems to prevent and support people who've experienced trauma? What can social services do? What can the criminal justice system do? What can early care and education do? All these systems that touch our lives absolutely need to be aware of ACEs, how common they are, their impact, and what they can do in their sector to support, again, children or families.
Right. Wow. I am absolutely going to look up that book. I can't wait to read it, because this is something I think a lot about. How can our communities be better supported? And I, talk to a lot of HR folks, so companies who are dealing with oftentimes the workplace that they know about, that not always happen in the workplace, but, employees they know who are dealing with a specific trauma. And I think a lot about, how can a community like a workplace be supportive of helping people heal from trauma, or building their resiliency, when as an organization, that is not the goal of a company one may work for?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I actually, a couple of years ago, we had the opportunity to present at a big conference for HR managers, because the question that you raise is, we spend a lot of time, a lot of hours, right, in our workplace, right? And we bring who we are to the workplace. And so I think there's a couple things that I think is important from that perspective. I think just a better understanding of how, if you're employing people, right?
Yes.
People likely, right, have these, or we're talking about childhood adversity and trauma, but also it occurs throughout the lifespan. So just that awareness that it is key. I think that what a workplace can do is, provide some of the supports that can help people. So that's looking at, do people have, the good medical health insurance, access to behavioral health services? Now, of course, this is not all on the employer, but there's a lot of things that the employer can provide that can increase their resources so people have access to some of the supports they need to take care of themselves or take care of their families.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's been fascinating for me to start looking into what kind of organizations do a good job at this and which ones seem to be struggling. And so I'm glad to hear you talk about, there's some ways they can gain some better understanding and provide some supports, because I think if we scratched at the surface, we all want people that we work with or who work for us to be healthy, if not because that's the right thing to do, but because healthier people are going to be better employees.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's, from some of the original ACEs studies, I think why we had this invitation to share at this conference of HR managers and other companies I'm seeing are interested in it, is that the more ACEs that we experienced as kids, we're more likely to, have absenteeism in the workplace, right? And that makes sense. We're more likely to experience health conditions, right? That may make it harder for us to be at work, right? So it's not just, I believe it's the right thing to do, but I think it affects the bottom line of many businesses. And so the awareness and providing the appropriate support so that people can do their best work at their job is really important. And understanding ACEs is a part of that.
Yes. So, we have been talking about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, but I've also heard about PACEs. What is that?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that question because it's often left out. PACEs stands for positive and adverse childhood experiences.
Okay.
There's actually an organization by the name called PACEs Connection. It was formerly ACEs Connection. It existed to raise awareness of ACEs and provide information and education to individuals, to communities, to professionals working in a variety of settings who recognize the importance of understanding ACEs. But like we discussed at the beginning, ACEs aren't the whole story. They're a part of it. As much as, even if, for example, someone didn't experience any of these sort of 10, and of course there's more than 10, but and we can talk about that. If they didn't experience any ACEs and didn't experience any positive childhood experiences, that matters. Positive childhood experiences matter in terms of the healthy development of a child. And oftentimes, positive childhood experiences can help mitigate the impact of ACEs. Often we have both, right? Our experience isn't just one thing. And so there's a lot of science that is now really understood that positive childhood experiences can help protect against the poor health outcomes associated with ACEs. And so just as much as we want to prevent, to the degree that we can, adversity will happen. So what can we do to promote in our environments and in our homes these positive experiences for children?
Wow. Okay. So there is a word that has come up several times in our conversation, and that is story. And I know that's an important word when we're talking about this topic. So talk to me about storytelling and what's the importance of that?
Yeah, well, first I'll say, when we launched the first national public awareness and education campaign on ACEs, hope and healing. We did that in the spring of 2021.
Okay.
That campaign and all our work since, that campaign was called The Story of Your Number, really based on the science of ACEs, but knowing that's just an entry point into your own personal story. It's not the whole story. So that's really how we wanted to frame and help people understand the science of early adversity. But what we have found, and through listening to people's stories and learning from other people's stories, is how important and how effective storytelling is to advancing these messages. And, as an epidemiologist who comes from a background where I'm used to presenting data and slides with endless charts or graphs, we have this recognition. And I think we can think about the pandemic and how much data and information was presented and how ineffective leading with the data or the science can be. And so when we listen to stories and when we share stories, we can actually be much more effective. Mm-hmm. And there's a better understanding than ever before about how storytelling can benefit our own health. It can benefit our mental health. We connect with characters in a story. Our brain can release oxytocin. Oxytocin is associated with empathy, a building block in helping us connect and deepen our relationships. There's research that shows how we tell our stories can control our mood and our self-image.
Yeah.
Narrative therapy can help people move past sort of problematic stories. And the act of telling stories helps us connect to others, make meaning, and organize our lives. And it can benefit us when we're ready, right? We can talk about trauma-informed storytelling and what that means. But storytelling can be really good for the person themselves, and it can be really effective in reaching other people. And so with our goal to raise awareness about adverse childhood experiences and other early adversity, storytelling is a strategy that is just absolutely critical if we want to be effective at reaching people with these messages. Does that answer your question?
That does answer my question. And flashing back to times when people have been trying to share information with me, and it's a lot of numbers and it's a lot of charts, and how disconnected I feel from that kind of information versus stories, which just in my own life, I know how important those are. So, the topic of ACEs is in many ways just about each of us as an individual and our own experiences and how we're making our way through the world. But as we've talked about, there is an impact on our communities and our systems and our organizations. And what would you say is the most important action or maybe policy that would help be supportive of trauma survivors or somebody dealing with their ACEs?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yes.
I want to pause and think about where I want to go with this. Because like I said, ACEs or early adversity and trauma can impact us in all different areas of our life. There's not just one solution in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, and through many stories and through a lot of data and research, we see that people who experience some of the health conditions that associated with early adversity and trauma don't get the resources or support that they say they want or that they need. And so what I hope to see is that our systems that, and just to be specific and name one, it's not the only one, but how we provide and how people are able to access behavioral health services in this country doesn't serve most people. And I think it doesn't serve people whose challenges are associated with trauma in the best way that it could. So I think that is one area that could greatly benefit people who've experienced, or adults who have experienced ACEs. Mm-hmm. And then I think what's also really important is, and I want to make clear, is that there's a lot of things that we as individuals and communities can be empowered to do outside of, the clinical space where a lot of people don't have access to, or again, it doesn't meet their needs related to trauma, or doesn't meet their needs related to culture, or doesn't, meet their needs related to disability, whatever it may be, is really this: how do we create these communities of care, right? There's much that we can do in our neighborhoods and our communities that can support millions of people, particularly in this moment where, there's such a shortage of licensed professional mental health professionals. How can we increase the number of people who provide peer support, who have lived experience? How do we deepen relationships with each other in community? We know how healthy relationships, the science of healthy relationships, can help lessen the impacts of ACEs and toxic stress. So I think there are things that need to be done in, settings that provide very important services and treatment, and then things we need to do in our communities to better support our well-being overall.
Yes. Oh, thank you for that. So we're getting close to the end. Is there any question that you wish I had asked you, but I did not?
I'm actually curious, in your experience, how have you seen storytelling be really effective? What sort of spaces or have helped you, or feel like you've helped advance work to support trauma survivors?
Oh, she turns the questions on the questioner. My experience is as a survivor of mass violence. And early on, I started to realize the value of telling my story, and both the value to me, how validating it was to share my story and to get the responses I was getting, and that I was actually helping educate people on what it's like to walk away from mass violence and be grateful to not have physical injuries, but to be dealing with the mental and emotional trauma and be essentially invisible in the story that the media is telling about the event. That's the angle that I've come from, where I know that I personally have benefited from sharing my story. And I know a lot of survivors who have turned to speaking about their experience as a way to heal themselves and help others understand.
Thank you for sharing. I'm really grateful that you are sharing your story. I'm grateful for everyone who does when it's the right time for them.
Yes.
Just tying it back to like the beginning of our conversation is that these issues affect so many different people. And I just really believe we need so many storytellers, because it can do so much when we hear our story and someone else's, and my story may not resonate, with everyone. And so we need people who want to share their stories. And I'm grateful for you and that you'll be doing more of this on the podcast.
Yes, absolutely. And I just wanted to acknowledge what you said, because when people are ready and able to share their stories, and, not everyone is or will be, it's not the right thing for everybody. But I know for myself, it was the ability to share my story has been something very valuable. Last question for you is, what would you tell your 18-year-old self about resiliency?
I would tell my 18-year-old self that I was more resilient than I realized or appreciated.
Yeah.
I was very judgy of myself, how I handled things.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, I'm in many ways very proud of my younger self, but she didn't get that type of self-love then, that I actually did have some wisdom about myself and how to take care of myself. And I would give her a high five and say, you're doing a really, really good job.
I love that. I think we, quite often we're hard on ourselves, but we also just don't extend that level of grace to ourselves that we do for others sometimes. So, Sarah, I could talk to you for hours upon hours. This topic is fascinating, and I love the work that you are doing. How can our listeners reach you?
Yeah, thank you very much. For people who want to learn more about ACEs, toxic stress, healing, the things we talked about today, can visit numberstory.org. And then for people who want to hear more stories, learn some more science on a more daily basis, we are at My Number Story on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And what we really try to do on those platforms are lift up stories and voices and share a little bit about the science and really be part of a community that we're all on a journey and that we can learn a lot from each other. So join us at My Number Story if you're interested.
Oh, that's excellent. And we will put links in the show notes to all of those for everyone. Sarah, thank you so much for your time today. And we're going to wrap it up.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.